Hi there everyone. So what we're going to be doing now is completing a range of videos about how to plant, how to mow, how to sow seed and grass, and these will enable you to get your practical elements done, and they will link to test papers. Now what we're going to do now is for the unit about planting herbaceous stock. What I've got here is an area ready for us to plant. Now this is obviously being forked over and I've got a rough tilth to this, so it means that we're ready to actually get planting with that. Now if we have a little look down here, we're going to be planting some herbaceous perennials. Now if you remember, herbaceous perennials are plants which die down to the ground during the winter and then come back in the spring, hence the perennial element. These are Virginia cordifolia. Please pay attention to that, they're going to be coming up in your ident soon. And these don't always die fully back during the winter, and what they do is they tend to go a little bit kind of dark brown, bronzy around the edges, but what they are is brilliant at this time of year with these beautiful flowers, great for bees, good ground cover. Now the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we have everything around us set for our planting exercise, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to keep coming back and then having to run around and find those other bits. So we've got our plants, we've got our area. Before we plant, we need to check them over. What we're doing is we're looking for pest and disease, so we need to look at the tops of the leaves, we need to look underneath the leaves, base and things like that. If there's a load of weeds, there's a little one there, here's a slightly bigger one here. We always want to make sure that they're gone. Obviously here I'm just throwing them into the bushes, but what would be best is to put them into a nearby wheelbarrow and make sure they were composted, assuming they're not nasty ones. So I've got my 3 plants, they're looking good healthy stock. There doesn't seem to be any pest and disease, but one thing that I can see even in this spring weather is they're starting to go a little bit flaccid because they've not got much water. So good practice is to always give them a little bit of a soak of water, just gently prior to planting, and that will liven them up and help them cope with what can be a little bit of shock when we're planting. Now spring is the best time because we do expect some rain, we do expect nice warm weather, but it is still getting cold at night. So these plants are going to be absolutely fine outside and not a problem. So what we've got to do is we've got to position them in the right place. If we have them so close to the edge, what can happen is they just spill over and we get a real problem with the fact that we have to keep cutting that back. So always set them slightly back from the edge to give them room to grow. Now obviously what we want them to do is to be near to the other plants but not too close. And here is a perfect space for a cluster of these which will then knit together and completely cover it as a ground cover. Now you need to know your plants for this. It's a case of right plant, right place. When you know your plants, you'll know how big they'll grow, and it is really important that you don't plant them too close initially. Give them room to grow. If you want an instant impact for someone, that's absolutely fine, but always warn a client that they will grow into each other very fast and they will need further maintenance at a later stage. So I'm going to give these just a little bit more room, because don't forget, you might be working on a budget, and it is really important that what we don't do is spend an absolute fortune if those plants in the following year are going to have to be moved. So I'm quite happy with that spacing. Okay, there's enough room for them to develop and grow, and they're not touching or anything like that. Now for each of these plants in turn, what I do, twist that round so I've got a nice little clear mark about where that's going to go. Now for something like this I could use a trowel. It's quite small, it's not too much of a problem, or alternatively just means that I don't have to be on my hands and knees, I'll use a small border spade. Now RHS are saying always to kind of dig a square hole where we used to dig a round hole. So a round hole may encourage roots to spiral in on itself, whereas a square hole will also then kind of allow the roots to go into those corners and those edges and branch out. This is the current thinking. My way of thinking is it doesn't matter at all, as long as you've done enough ground prep on that soil, so it's actually going to be enough room for those roots. obviously a square hole is easy when you've got a square-sided tool to do it. So loosen that soil, you know where your hole needs to go, get your nice square sides. Now remember everyone, don't bung it all over the shop, park it nearby. The hole should be a little bit bigger, if not twice the size of the plant. So if you need to, just keep checking. So I'll move some of that out, put that there, have a quick check. Could be a little bit more. Always helps to break up that bottom as well. We are going to reuse all of this soil. We'll throw that all over the place. Right, so that should be fine. Okay, now what we've got is a nice hole there. What I always like to do as well, put a little bit of water just into the base there, just to moisten that, so when the roots, which are wet at the moment, don't then kind of come into contact with dry soil. A little bit of compost sprinkled into the bottom. You could use like a bloodfish and bone fertiliser if you wanted to, but I don't see the need. Our soils are generally quite good. They're full of nutrition anyway, but if you want to, there's no harm in it. So we take our plant, we grasp it firmly but gently, and then using our hand we just support the plant and gently jiggle it. If it does get stuck in there, a few firm whacks will help it. Now at this stage what we're doing is we're looking at the roots. So we're looking for nice light coloured roots, not brown. You can see that the soil and compost here is nice and wet, so it's all good from the watering that we've just given it. But all these roots have been in there for a while, so they're all wound up like that. So what we do is we gently tease them out, tickling the roots to help those roots to find their way into their new abode. Okay, unlike us, they're not on lockdown, okay, but they are stuck in one place. So once I've done that, just tickle them gently. I don't want to damage them. I then place it into my hole, just make sure it's the right size. Okay, so I've put a bit of compost in there. I need to make sure this plant now is at the right level. So I keep moving that soil and I'm checking all the time that that plant is in the right place with the surrounding soil. And I'm going to mix a couple of handfuls more of the compost and place that round, gently lifting those leaves so I am not always damaging it. My plant should look like it belongs there. So I keep moving that round. What I'm doing now is gently applying a little bit of firm pressure, just leaning forward, and by doing that I'm taking out all the additional air pockets and making sure that plant, when I water it, the water goes in but sits, but it can still drain. If I stood on it with my steel toe caps, I could potentially cause puddling, overcompact that soil, and it's really important that I don't. So press, 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 making sure all the time what I'm doing is I'm keeping the area around it tidy. So you can see that that plant is at the right level, can be just a touch below the soil level to allow water to go in, but generally the best idea is to keep that at the right level. It's in the right place, there's enough room around it, so it looks healthy and fine. If there were any bits of damage that had happened, I could get the secateurs, I could trim that down. That plant doesn't need it, so it's absolutely fine. So all I need to do with each plant, and if I'm working on them one by one and I only had 3, I could then plant all 3 and then water. But in this situation, because I'm just doing this as a test, what I would want to do is give them a water. Now a lot of people just come along, give it a little bit of a soak, and that's it. That's not enough. On average, I generally give it the count of 10 to allow that water to go through and all the way down to those roots. That's also why we put some at the beginning. So over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Looks like a lot, and it's a really good way to test whether or not that water is going to penetrate down into that soil. So you can see that it's slowly soaking through, and that's absolutely fine, and that will mean it will go all the way down. Now that area around it's all fine. I might use my rake at the end just to get a fine tilth. I don't want to see any footprints on that at all. What I would then do to help is I would put an organic mulch, and in this situation it's bark chip, around the base. Don't want that huge log. And this does a number of functions. Keeps it toasty, keeps it warm, adds nutrients as it breaks down into that soil. Also, the fact that I'm doing this after I've watered it is it helps to keep that water locked into that soil. So it is really key to mulch, and not only that, but it also looks really attractive. Now some people moan about it, and look, there's a little snail shell. Some people say it can attract pests and disease, but if you think about it naturally, out there in the world, there'll be leaves, there'll be debris around all plants, so they cope with it. It's absolutely fine. And as you see, what you have is a lovely finish there. The plant firmly in there. You can give it a gentle pull to make sure it doesn't come out, and that looks absolutely lovely. And you can give it a little sweep down, making it all nice and neat at the end, and you can always give it a final glug of water to make sure it all looks nice and neat. Thank you, and I'll see you next time for another exciting episode of Chris and Gardens.